Hi everyone, this is Ken LaRue, Technical Marketing Manager for Professional Video at Autodesk, and I'm going to walk you through a video tutorial on how smoke was used to create a specific shot in a short film called Fix It in Post. Now let's give credit where credit is due. The footage I'm using, as I said, is from a short film called Fix It in Post. It's a great short film. I highly recommend you going and watching it. It's about 8 minutes long. It's available on YouTube. You can do a search on YouTube. Just type in Fix It in Post and make sure you find the Fix It in Post film created by Jeremy Hunt from his company Screaming Death Monkey, and you'll be able to watch the whole film. Or you can make note of the URL that I'm putting up on the screen here, and you can go and put that in your browser and it'll navigate directly to the website at YouTube, to the YouTube page with this film. Again, I highly recommend you watching it, but this is the shot that we're going to focus on in this tutorial that I'm doing right now. It's this part of the scene. Well, actually, first of all, in the movie, this scene, the talent is walking and hits his head on 3D text that appears, but the 3D text in the film actually says a film by Jeremy Hunt. But in my case, or in this tutorial, I'm going to use the words Fix It in Post. Same concept, exactly the same procedure is done. Just the text reads something a little different. Let me play this back, and then let's start dissecting. Now, this is the end result that you're seeing here. So we've already got the color grade, we've got vignettes put on here, we've got all the compositing, all the different elements are put together. And then we're going to look at the raw footage, and we'll build this from scratch, like I said. One other thing I got to say, unfortunately, I cannot give you this footage. We don't have the rights to do that. But in all honesty, when you see the raw footage, it's something you probably could go and replicate very easily if you really want to follow along and watch this and do it yourself. You'll just shoot the footage yourself. It's a still image of a cloud, of a sky, and a live action of a guy walking in the alley. Okay, but let's just watch the end result first. So here we go. So as you can see, the talent is walking through the alley, and unknown to him, 3D text is going to just appear in the sky. He's going to hit his head on it, and there's a camera shake, and there's a lot of work that goes into the shot that you don't even realize yet. And that's really the beauty of smoke that allows you to do all this in one place. So let me jump over to another sequence that I have. As I said, this is the raw footage prior to any of the work done. The editing's done, but no compositing has been done. Let me choose the fit option from the zoom menu so we can get the whole scene into our whole frame into our UI. So I've got two layers already composited and edited in my sequence. The top layer is the live action footage. I should also mention that I'm using the new Smoke 2013 hotkeys, and those are the ones I'll be referring to as I walk through this video, this lesson. And we know that we can take our focus point and I can bring it up and down by grabbing it and moving it inside of my sequence. But if I want to use my hotkeys of page up and page down, that also allows me to toggle between the primary or the focus point inside of my sequence. So we can see we have our live action of the guy. We go down one by using the page down button. You see we have a still image of a sky with clouds. Now if I select this, you're going to notice that there's a resize tool already applied to it. And that is because if I hold the / key and click on this clip to bring up the information dialog box, you can see that it's 2048 by 1080. While if I move up where I'm still holding the / key, the footage above it is 1920 by 1080. And that is what my sequence is. The sequence is 1920 by 1080. But the reason why the resize has been added is because of the fact that the file underneath it is a much larger file. So Smoke will automatically apply a resize whenever you insert or overwrite or edit a clip into a sequence that has a different resolution. So as you know, the bottom clip has a resize applied to it. The top clip has no tools applied to it because it matches the resolution of my sequence, but we want to take both of these into Connect Effects. So I'll hold the Command key, I'll select both of them. I'll go over to the Effects button to bring out the Effects ribbon and make sure Generate Composite is on. And what that means is we're telling Smoke to create an action node and composite these layers together. Another thing to point out, now my bottom layer is that the image, the sky image, and because it has a resize, because it has a tool applied to it, it will not be brought in as the background image in the action node. If you have no tools applied to the bottom layer in my sequence here, that image is always brought in as the background image for the action node when you choose this option, Generate Composite. You can obviously change it, and in fact, we're going to do that because in this case, what's going to happen, since there is no technical plate, because we have a tool applied to this cloud image, Smoke's going to add a solid black frame and bring that in as the back plate. We're going to want to use this top layer as our back plate, as a background, so that we can use it as a reference for tracking the camera data that we're going to repurpose later. So once again, I've got my 2 layers selected. I've got my 2 video clips selected, I should say. I've got Generate Composite enabled, and I choose Create Connect Effects. We step into Connect Effects, and just as I said, an action node is created. You'll see that the layer of the guy is brought in, and also the footage of the cloud and the resize tool that was applied out in the timeline has been brought in. And as I said, a solid frame has been brought in the back clip and is fed into the green input, the background input of the action node. First thing I want to do is I want to take my media library and make it go away. I don't need it right now. You can choose from the flyout right below it to hide it, or you can use the hotkey of 1 and your left arrow key. And this will just make this disappear. You're hiding it. Again, 1 left arrow hotkey will bring it back and forth. So if you want to bring it up really quickly to get some footage, you can do that, and then just quickly hide it to add more real estate or more room for our different views. I'm going to talk about what these nodes are and what they represent, the color scheme. Every single node, whether it's a image node such as this, or a resize tool, or an action tool, or even your output, this is the final output node that's going back to our timeline, you'll have a yellow output. And that is the result. That's the end result of what exactly is happening from that node. So as simple as form, here's my image node of the background, the JPEG, right? And its output is going to be itself, okay? That's going to go into a resize. And you'll notice as I select between the two of them, first of all, there's a change in the view because the resize is altering the size of the file or the display of the file. And it has an output. And that output then, the yellow output, goes out into 2 different inputs. And this node is an input node representing a media that's going into action. It's being used instead of action. But going back to the color scheme of these nodes, again, my resize has a yellow output and it's going into 2 different inputs for this media source that is part of action. The red is your front, it's your RGB. And the blue is going to be your matte or your mask or your alpha information. So the concept is we can add tools that will affect the front, the RGB, or the matte or the alpha information for this media layer. If you see a green input, that is always going to be the representation of your background. So it obviously means the node that has that green input has compositing capabilities. You have ways of compositing different video sources or media sources on each other. So as we said, we've got our 2 different image sources going into 2 different media inputs. Each one has a front and a back input going into the action tool. Looking down at the bottom of the UI, whatever tool you have selected is going to be displayed inside the UI. Meaning if I select my resize tool, I change to the resize. All the parameters relevant to the resize. If I select the action or one of its media inputs, you'll notice that the action parameters become available to us. If I select my output parameters come available. Okay, so that's the concept in the workflow. As you select something, those parameters will be available to you on the bottom. Also notice that my viewport is changing as I select different things. That's because I have this viewport set to display the result of whatever node that I select. So this flyout here, and this gets a little confusing. You got to remember that this flyout where it says view, this affects whatever current view is highlighted. So notice that there's this highlight line around my schematic over, my Connect Effects schematic. So if I want to change what this is, I select that view, clicking in it, and then I go to this flyout, then I can switch to any one of the many views that are available to me. I say that because if I want to change this view, you have to first click on it to make sure it is selected. Now I can come in here and you'll see that I can change it to any one of the views if I wanted to. But as I said, currently it is set to the output, the main output of whatever tool is selected. So right now it says Action Output 1 Default Camera. If I select the resize, it's now going to come over here, click this again, it's going to read resize result. F4 is that hotkey. So you can activate or toggle any view to be the result of what you're selecting with the F4 key. And as we work, we'll toggle between different views, and I'll discuss other hotkeys you can use to switch between the different views. But let me go back over here, select the action tool. So as I mentioned earlier, this black clip has come in here as this background because of the fact that the resize tool was applied to the bottom layer, so technically there was no back clip, so it fed it in there. I want to take the output of our live action Ellie scene and feed that into the green. So you can simply click off of the yellow and I can drag and drop it, and now it is fed in as the background. If you want to disconnect something, cut it if you will, you can just click and drag across and you're going to break the connection. Another method of connecting nodes, and it's also very handy as your schematic gets more complicated and you have many tools or many nodes in it, is click on the output of whatever the node is. So in this case, the yellow of my background footage, my Ellie scene, I just click on it and then I go to the green input for the action node and I click on that. So the connection will automatically be made because I first said take this output and connect it to this input. And just so you know, you can do that in reverse. So again, let me cut that. Let me click to select the green input for the background. You see it's highlighted. And I'll come over here and click on the yellow output for this, and the connection is also made. Also notice the arrows are indicating the direction of the flow. Right now, everything I have is going from left to right. Now, my favorite hotkey to use when connecting nodes in ConnectFX is using the option key. This is something called the auto link and the advanced auto link option. So for example, we know we have this media source going into both the front and the back for this media source in action, right? Let me just drag across and cut that temporarily. Now if I select this, I hold the Option/Alt key and I just kiss the nodes together, I'll make a connection. I now connected the output of the Ellie scene, the footage for the guy walking in the alley, with the front input for the media source for media number 2. Continuously holding down the Alt key, I can again take the blue, the matte, and kiss and add that. Now when your scene does get complicated and you have lots of nodes, and there are some tools with multiple inputs where you'll have 3, maybe even 4 possible inputs depending on the tool. The KISS method I just showed you, technically it's called the auto-linked method, might lead to connections that aren't correct, meaning you might connect something to the matte that you really wanted connected to the front. So there's another hotkey to add, a modifier key to add to the option key. So let me just drag across and cut all those. I'll take my media again. I'll hold down my option key, but now watch this. I click the shift key. I now extend the front input. And if I toggle repeatedly clicking the shift key, I now extend the matte back to the front. So I click that, I connect that, I hit the shift key again, and I expand and connect it. So holding the option key and then clicking on the shift key will let you cycle through each one of the possible inputs that are available for the selected tool, depending upon how many inputs it has. And speaking of that, if we look down in the UI for action, you'll see the media list here, and it's telling you what you have connected. You can see it obviously here in the schematic, but you can also see it down here. And notice that this input 1, is telling me that my front is actually an internal input. Now, why is that? That's because if you look up in the schematic, you can see that I accidentally, well, kind of purposely accidentally, disconnected the input for the front. So it's telling you down here with the bright letters, internal, that you have no input to the front. I have an input to the matte, F for front, obviously, M for matte, and it's showing me that I have this input, the resize tool is being brought in as the matte, but I don't have anything fed into the front. So that's as simple, again, as just clicking off the resize up here and reconnecting it to our front. And once again, we go back down to our UI. You can see now the front has been brought in. One more thing about the inputs, whether it's front or matte or even the back, you have the ability to turn those on and off and determine if you want to use that input or not. Just because this resize is attached to the matte input for Media 1 does not mean I'm using it in the action tool. You're looking at the media list, yes, it says there we have the resize tool coming in as our matte. But look at right next to it, these buttons right to the left of it. Here's where I can control whether the matte is being used or not, whether the matte is on or off. You'll notice in the thumbnail area, it says matte off. And that's because you'll see it reads matte off right here. If I turn matte on, now you'll notice the matte is being turned on. And when the matte is on, and when you have the same image or a color image such as this being fed into the matte input, it's going to use the luminance of that image as your matte. So while you have control as to what goes into the matte and what goes into the front, you also have control of turning on and off the front and the matte. And by selecting any of the media in the media list here, you will be able to control that media individually, whether the matte is on or the front is on. You also have the option to have the back on or off. Now let me go back and select this media source, Media 1, where I've turned on the matte. Now what happens if I come up into my schematic view and I cut the matte? Well, now what we have is an internal matte, which is solid white, meaning it's totally opaque. There is no transparency whatsoever happening to this. It's almost the same as turning the matte off, but technically with the matte off, no matter what you feed into this input is not going to affect the image. But just to reiterate, with the matte on and no input, you're technically using a matte for this media source, but it is a solid white element, a solid white frame. Just to make sure I have no transparency whatsoever with my clouds, I'm going to tell this media source, turn the matte off. I want no transparency taking place. Now I have the connections made and my media source and my layers set as I want them to start. One last thing about the media, and that is the priority of the layers as how they are stacked on top of each other. Now looking down in the media list, you might assume that this is the stacking order, when it's not. It is the order in which you brought the media into action. Right now it follows, meaning we've got our background, and then we've got the clouds, which is the media 1, and then we've got media 2. And if we look at our viewport, we can see that media 2 is on top of media 1 and the background. But if I wanted to change that, let's say I wanted to move the hierarchy of media 1, the clouds, in front of media 2, not in Z-space. I just want to stack them differently. You're not going to do that in this media list. The media list is an access or a bin where all your media is placed into. To change the hierarchy or the priority, you have to go to the priority editor. You see the button over here on the left. I click on that. Here's where I now can control the hierarchy and the priority of my layers as to how they are stacked. By default, everything you bring in is going to be brought in at the 0 point for Z position, the distance from the camera. And the layers are going to be stacked with a priority based upon the order that you bring them in. If I want to push or move image 2 behind image 1, I can select it. Then you have the buttons over here to bring to forward or bring to back. Or if I hold the control and the command key, I can drag it below it. So again, control command allows me to reorder the priority in a drag method over here in the list. Or I can use these buttons to control the layers, the priority of the layers. So image 2 is still selected. I say bring to front. By clicking the button, you'll see it is changed, and at the top to bottom is stacked here with these 2 layers. Now because I'm talking about the priority and I'm talking about Z-space, I just want to touch on a preference that is for action, this action node, very quickly, and we'll come back and visit it later when it makes more sense to visit it. But I just need to just bring it up for a second. Let me discard my priority editor for a second. Let me go to node preferences. So notice that if you select any node, you have an option called CFX preferences. So these are my preferences for my Connect effects. And then with a node selected, you can go to the node preferences. Now on the resize, there are no node preferences. So there's nothing here I can change. That's because the resize tool is a pretty straightforward tool. But watch what happens when I select the action tool. I get all these preferences. These are relevant to just what the action tool offers you as far as individual preferences. The one I'm talking about is on the rendering tab, which is the currently selected one by default. Under rendering, there's a Z buffer option. You'll notice that it's off by default. What this means is the layers hierarchy is going to always be controlled by the priority editor. If I turn Z buffer on, what this means is the distance a layer is to the camera is now going to control what is in front of each other. So like I said, I know it sounds a little confusing right now, but I'm bringing it up only because we talked about the priority editor, and I think it just needs to be brought up. But once we get into action and start moving things around in ZSpace, we'll come back and visit this. For right now, let's leave ZBuffer off. So I think we've covered our inputs, our layers, and the connection of nodes in CFX enough. Let's start working on our actual composite.